Dolly Parton's final farewell has taken on a deeply different meaning after her death, leaving fans to look back at the moments they once watched as celebrations and now see through the lens of an ending they never expected. The legendary country icon spent decades creating music, memories, and moments that seemed almost larger than life. But after her passing, even the most familiar images of Dolly can suddenly feel heartbreaking. A public funeral or memorial for someone like Parton would never be an ordinary gathering, because her influence reached far beyond country music. She became a symbol of perseverance, generosity, humor, and the extraordinary power of staying true to where you came from. For generations of fans, Dolly was more than a singer standing under bright lights with a guitar in her hands. She was a storyteller whose songs carried pieces of her own life into the lives of millions of other people. That is why the idea of a final farewell feels so emotional. When people watch old footage of Dolly smiling, laughing, performing, or speaking about the things she loved, they are no longer simply watching another celebrity appearance. They are watching memories of someone who is no longer here to create new ones. And that realization changes everything. Dolly Parton's career was built over decades, beginning with humble roots in Tennessee and eventually reaching stages, movie screens, television programs, theme parks, charitable organizations, and some of the biggest moments in American popular culture. She wrote songs that became classics, including Jolene, Coat of Many Colors, 9 to 5, and I Will Always Love You. She became an actress, a businesswoman, a philanthropist, and an unmistakable cultural figure. Yet through all of that success, one quality remained central to her public image. Dolly never seemed embarrassed by where she came from. Her childhood in the Smoky Mountains was not something she tried to hide. Instead, it became part of the foundation of the person the world came to know. That background made her success feel even more extraordinary, because the woman who grew up with very little eventually created an empire built not only around entertainment, but around the idea of giving something back. And perhaps that is why any final public farewell carries such weight. It is not only goodbye to a performer. It is goodbye to an entire era. Fans who first discovered Dolly decades ago are now looking back at performances they may have watched countless times before, hearing familiar lyrics with a new sense of emotion. A smile that once seemed joyful can now feel bittersweet. A joke that once made audiences laugh can suddenly sound like a precious memory. A performance that once felt like another night in a long career can now seem like part of a final chapter. That is the strange power of a farewell after someone dies. The meaning of old moments can change without the moments themselves changing at all. The footage stays the same, but the viewer does not. Suddenly, every detail seems more important. The way Dolly spoke about her family. The way she laughed at herself. The way she encouraged people to dream beyond their circumstances. The way she could command a stage while still appearing approachable. Those details become part of the emotional story fans carry forward. And if a public funeral or memorial becomes the place where family, friends, fellow artists, and admirers gather to honor her, the event would represent far more than the end of a life. It would become a reflection of the extraordinary number of people who felt connected to Dolly in some way. For fellow musicians, she was a songwriter whose talent was difficult to measure. For actors, she was a performer who could move effortlessly between music and film. For entrepreneurs, she was an example of someone who understood how to turn a personal identity into a lasting brand. And for countless families, she was simply Dolly, the familiar voice that had been present for years. That broad connection explains why tributes surrounding her loss can feel almost impossible to contain. There is no single way to remember Dolly Parton because she meant different things to different people. Some will remember a song. Others will remember a movie. Some will remember visiting Dollywood. Others will remember receiving books through the Imagination Library. Some will remember a television appearance or an interview. And some may simply remember the feeling Dolly gave them whenever she appeared on screen. Her ability to make people feel hopeful became one of the most recognizable parts of her legacy. She repeatedly spoke about using success to help others, and her philanthropic work became nearly as important to her public identity as her music. The Imagination Library, in particular, turned her belief in children's literacy into an initiative that reached families far beyond Tennessee. That is important when considering what a final farewell means, because Dolly's legacy cannot be placed inside a funeral program or summarized in a few speeches. Her legacy exists in the people who were influenced by her work and in the lives touched by the causes she supported. Her music may have made her famous, but her generosity helped make her unforgettable.
There's also something deeply emotional about imagining the people closest to Dolly confronting a goodbye that millions of fans can only understand from a distance. Family members would not be saying farewell to an icon. They would be saying goodbye to a person they knew privately, away from the cameras and crowds. Friends would remember conversations that the public never heard. Fellow performers would remember the moments that never appeared in biographies. And fans would bring their own memories, even if those memories came from a stage, a television screen, or a recording. That is what makes a public memorial so powerful. Everyone arrives with a different version of the same person, yet somehow all of those versions can exist together. Dolly the superstar, Dolly the songwriter, Dolly the actress, Dolly the businesswoman, Dolly the philanthropist, Dolly the friend, Dolly the wife, Dolly the daughter, Dolly the woman who spent a lifetime turning personal experiences into stories that other people could understand. The emotional meaning of a final farewell also comes from the realization that there will be no new Dolly Parton moments in the same way. No new surprise appearance that instantly dominates the conversation. No new song arriving with that unmistakable voice. No new interview where her humor makes an ordinary question memorable. No new performance where audiences wait for the first note and immediately recognize the person behind it. What remains now is an enormous archive of everything she already gave the world. And that archive is filled with moments that can be revisited again and again. This is why an old farewell video or final public appearance can suddenly become so emotional after death. Before the loss, viewers see a celebrity moment. After the loss, they see history. They start searching for clues and expressions, words, and gestures that may never have seemed important at the time. They wonder whether that appearance carried a meaning they failed to notice. They replay statements about life, family, faith, music, aging, and the future, looking for something that might explain what came later. But sometimes the most powerful truth is that there was no hidden message at all. Sometimes a final appearance is simply a moment that became meaningful because history gave it a new context. Dolly Parton's final farewell would therefore not need a dramatic secret to become emotional. The emotion comes from knowing that the person in those images represented a lifetime of memories that can no longer be extended. Her fans can revisit the past, but they cannot create another moment with her. That distinction is what makes the final footage feel so precious. It becomes a bridge between the Dolly people remember and the Dolly who is now part of history. And as tributes continue, one thing becomes increasingly clear. Dolly Parton's story cannot be reduced to the circumstances surrounding her death. Her final farewell may be the moment when the world says goodbye, but her real legacy was built long before that day. It was built in the songs she wrote when she was still establishing herself. It was built through performances that made her a household name. It was built through the characters she portrayed on screen. It was built through Dollywood and the communities connected to it. It was built through the children reached by her literacy efforts. It was built through the countless people who heard her story and believed that their own beginnings did not have to determine their endings. That may ultimately be the most powerful message surrounding her farewell. Dolly Parton spent her life proving that extraordinary success did not require forgetting ordinary beginnings. She could become a global superstar and still celebrate the mountains where she grew up. She could become wealthy and still talk openly about the values that shaped her family. She could become one of the most recognizable women in entertainment and still make people feel as though they were listening to someone from their own hometown. That connection is difficult to manufacture, and perhaps that is why her loss feels so personal to so many people who never actually met her. They grew up with her voice. They watched her performances. They listened to her songs during important moments in their own lives. In that sense, Dolly became part of people's personal histories without ever knowing their names. A funeral can mark the end of physical life, but it cannot erase that kind of connection. The flowers eventually fade. The ceremonies eventually end. The crowds eventually go home. But the recordings remain. The photographs remain. The stories remain. And most importantly, the memories remain. Years from now, someone who never had the chance to see Dolly perform live will still discover her music. Someone will hear Jolene for the first time. Someone will watch 9 to 5 and discover her as an actress. Someone will find an old interview and laugh at one of her unforgettable jokes. Someone will learn about the Imagination Library and realize that her influence reached far beyond entertainment. That is how a legacy survives. Not through one final ceremony, but through the continuous discovery of the work a person leaves behind. And perhaps that is what makes the idea of Dolly Parton's final farewell so emotional. The farewell itself may last only a day, but the meaning of her life cannot be contained in one day. Her career crossed generations. Her songs crossed genres. Her personality crossed the boundaries between celebrity and familiarity. And her influence reached people who knew her personally, as well as people who only knew her through a screen. When fans look back at her final public moments now, they may notice details they once overlooked. But the most important thing to remember is not to search for a hidden ending where there may not have been one. Instead, those moments can be appreciated for what they were. Another glimpse of Dolly Parton doing what she had spent her entire life doing, connecting with people. Her final farewell does not erase the joy that came before it. If anything, it makes those joyful moments feel even more valuable. The laughter matters more. The songs matter more. The stories matter more. The kindness matters more. Because now every memory has become part of a legacy. Dolly Parton's life was never only about becoming famous. It was about turning hardship into creativity, creativity into success, and success into opportunities for others. That is why her final farewell can be both heartbreaking and uplifting at the same time. There is sadness because someone beloved is gone, but there's also gratitude because she left behind so much. Her voice, her songs, her characters, her businesses, her charitable work, her humor, and the countless memories created across generations will continue speaking long after the final ceremony ends. And maybe that is the true meaning of a farewell to Dolly Parton. It is not simply the moment the world says goodbye. It is the moment the world begins to understand just how much she left behind. The final images may make fans emotional, but they also serve as a reminder that Dolly Parton gave audiences an extraordinary number of moments to remember. Her story does not end when the memorial ends. It continues every time one of her songs plays, every time someone watches one of her films, every time a child receives a book through an initiative inspired by her, and every time a new generation discovers a woman whose name became synonymous with music, warmth, resilience, and generosity. Dolly Parton's final farewell may close one chapter, but it cannot close the story she spent a lifetime writing. And that is why, even after the tears, the silence, and the goodbye, Dolly Parton will still be heard.